For most people, that chime an iPad makes when you have a notification is a nuisance. But for Paul Broussard, it's a heart-stopping paradox. On the one hand, it gives him hope that his 4-year-old daughter Lindsey is still alive. On the other, that proof of life comes with the knowledge that Paul's little girl now exists in some earthly hell. There are a few places in the world that rival the city of New Orleans when it comes to ghost stories, hauntings, or just an overall sense of foreboding, especially after the sun goes down. If you've been here, you already know. If you haven't, it's easy to dismiss the city's reputation as a tourist trap. But for those who live here, the haunted label isn't a marketing gimmick. It's a reality as heavy and inescapable as the heat and humidity. And like the swamp water percolating beneath the pavement, this unseen threat is everywhere, trying to seep up through the cracks and destroy our misconceptions about reality. That said, there exists one old property in a dark, forgotten corner of the city's Garden District that even here remains unmatched in its long, terrifying history. It's called Silent Oaks, and it has the distinction of being one of the few buildings in New Orleans with a basement. It's also one of the most haunted. The incident involving Paul Broussard is the latest unexplained event to take place during the home's 150-year history, but it is unlikely to be the last. In the spring of 2025, a young couple with a 4-year-old daughter bought Silent Oaks with the intention of renovating the mansion. 5 years earlier, the previous owners had fled the property in the middle of the night and never returned. As a consequence, the Oaks was in a frightening state of disrepair when Paul and Annie took ownership. And maybe that's the way the house wanted things to be. You see, the first morning after sleeping in the house, Lindsey, the couple's daughter, claimed someone had been in her room, whispering to her as she slept. She said the man had no face and smelled of rotting wood. Not surprisingly, Annie and Paul blamed their daughter's fear on the stress of moving into a strange old house in a dark corner of the city. They should have believed her. Instead, Lindsey spent the day in her mother's shadow while Annie was unpacking moving boxes. Paul, a professional photographer, was shooting a wedding and wouldn't be home until late that night. But halfway through the event, he received a frantic call from Annie, who was screaming that Lindsey was missing. The two of them had fallen asleep on the sofa together after supper, but she woke up alone an hour later. Lindsey had vanished. Annie searched the entire house, even forcing open the swollen cellar door at the end of the hallway. It took 10 minutes of shoulder work before giving way, but there was nothing but suffocating darkness below, and the air that rolled out smelled rotted, as if Annie had opened a tomb. There was no sign of Lindsey, not down there or anywhere else. When Paul suggested their daughter had simply gone up to her bedroom, Annie became even more agitated, not only because she'd already checked upstairs, but because Lindsey was absolutely terrified of the third floor. Even so, Annie agreed to look again, and as she climbed the stairwell past the second-floor landing, the house fell silent. All afternoon, the mansion had echoed with faint footsteps and groaning floorboards. But now, as Annie reached the top floor, Silent Oaks was living up to its name. And that eerie, unsettling quiet was more terrifying than anything she had heard earlier that day. Holding the phone to her ear, Annie entered Lindsey's room and was shocked to find her daughter asleep in bed beside Bramble, her stuffed bear. Unfortunately, the relief was short-lived. As she pulled the blankets over her daughter, the room suddenly filled with dim light. Annie froze in fear before realizing Paul's camera was syncing wedding photos to his iPad, which was at the foot of Lindsey's bed. She was about to ask Paul why he hadn't taken the device to work with him when a photo appeared on screen that made the hairs on her arms stand up. It was an image of Lindsey standing on the basement steps, holding Bramble.
Annie was livid. Aside from the photo being unsettlingly creepy, she and Paul had agreed the basement would be off limits to their daughter. The problem was that Paul had no idea what Annie was talking about. He hadn't brought Lindsey to the basement, and he certainly hadn't taken that photo of her. But when he scrolled through his camera and saw the image of his daughter in the stairwell, his heart stopped. Not because he hadn't taken the photo, but because of the expression on Lindsey's face. She was terrified and clearly didn't recognize the person behind the camera. Annie was about to hang up and call 911 when another photo was uploaded to the iPad, this one from her phone. It was a picture of her and Lindsey sleeping on the sofa 30 minutes earlier. When Annie told Paul about the photo, he screamed at her to get Lindsey out of the house. But the line had gone dead. New Orleans police were already at Silent Oaks when Paul arrived. They had searched every inch of the mansion. There was no sign of Annie, no sign of Lindsey. All they had found was Bramble sitting in the stairwell with his button eyes ripped out and his mouth sewn shut. It's all they would ever find. Every few weeks, a new photo would upload to Paul's iPad from Annie's missing phone. They were always of Lindsey, and always in the basement. And in the background of each photo, barely visible in the shadows, stood a figure with no face. The police were unable to trace Annie's phone, and they eventually stopped coming to the house, but Paul stayed. For 6 months, he haunted his own hallways, holding out hope that the house would spit back out the wife and child it had seemingly devoured. The house refused. Eventually, Paul could no longer bear to stay, so he packed what little he had left in this world and walked out of Silent Oaks for the last time. But the photos didn't stop. They still arrive. Weeks apart, sometimes months. But they're always of his daughter, somewhere in the dark, growing older. And always, just behind her, the same featureless shape, standing a little closer each time. Paul doesn't know if Annie is alive. He doesn't know where Lindsey is. What he's certain of, though, is that whoever or whatever is in that basement has his family. And it wants Paul to know it.